Welcome to the Coder Dojo from Anthus AI Solutions. If you're interested in AI-assisted coding, then you're probably familiar with things like Claude Artifacts, where you can ask a question and you have a chat interface on the left side, but then Artifacts on the right side, where it writes code that you can preview interactively and work with. You've probably also heard of things like the Zero from Vercel, where you have a very similar interface. Here's some examples of cool things that people have named. The overall paradigm is the same, where you have a chat interface, and then you have a preview in your code over on the right side. The problem with things like this is that it's very easy to rapidly prototype ideas, but then you start to run into problems pretty quickly. So one of the problems is, how do you actually take this and host it? How do you connect it to real data? And then you start to discover problems just on a practical level as you start to get more complex with things like every time you try to add a new feature, you start to break existing features. So basically, if you're trying to approach this from the perspective of not dealing with any of this code at all, then you run into problems. One of the solutions to that is a product like maybe Bolt, where Bolt can set up a technology stack so that whatever you create, you can actually watch it and actually host it. So that's kind of neat, but just in reality, it's not very realistic to get all of your developers to switch over to something like Bolt.mu when they have decades of experience using other things. So we know that Cursor is really powerful, but the problem with Cursor is it's a little less accessible. It's not really set up with a chat interface on the left and the preview on the right, and it's not really set up to do the kind of things that V0 is set up for. If you know how to do it, then certainly it is, but if you don't know how to do it, then it's not very accessible. It's a little intimidating. So that's what the Vibe Coding Workbench is. I'd like to demonstrate how easy it is to take the Vibe Coding Workbench and turn Cursor into something like v0.dev, but with the big key difference in that whatever you create is very easy for you to hand off to developers to take and extend using the traditional development techniques that they've been using for decades. So that allows you to blend into the process of the developers rather than creating a problem for them. And rather than competing with them, you're creating opportunities for them that are easy for them to build on. So the first thing that you need to do to work with the Vibe Coding Workbench is probably to fork it to a private fork of your own so that you're on your own private work. We are going to use the main fork here because I'm part of the Anthus AI Solutions development team, so I'm just working on the main fork. So I've already cloned this project locally to my Mac. This is Cursor here, so I'm going to open the project. One of the first things that I'd like to point out is that in most projects you have a README file, which is aimed at giving context to humans. So even the Vibe Coding Workbench, there's also a Cursor rules file, which is aimed at giving context to the AI coding assistant. So the first thing it tells it is that every time you open a new AI coding session, it sees these instructions. So the first thing it tells it is how to get some basic context. It tells it to read this file. This file is intended for both you and the AI coding assistant to tell you basically what's going on, what the principles are, that sort of thing, what the benefits are, how everything works. And then there's are a curated set of technologies like Storybook, Gestic, Jest Testing, TypeScript, and this rules file tells the AI agent what technologies to use and how to use them. It tells it how to start a new development session each time. Every time you create a new component, it tells you what you need in the component. It tells it a lot about best practices and agile software development principles to follow, and it gives it some very specific details about how to integrate new components into this project. But you don't need to worry about that file, because that is just how we give instructions to the AI. You don't need to worry about it. In fact, you don't need to worry about any of these files. You can just sort of pretend like they don't exist, because when we do this sort of AI assisted coding, we're not working with any code files at all. We're not writing code. I'm not even going to be typing during this demo. So a lot of people call this vibe coding. at Anthus AI Software Solutions, we really don't like the term vibe coding, but it works. People are using it, so we might as well adopt it. It does sort of express the concept of building software by guiding the process through latent space rather than by literally writing code manually. So, I mean, it does sort of express the right concept, so we'll go with that. We don't really like the idea, or we don't really like the name just from a branding perspective, but whatever. Anyway, so one of the things that we're doing with this project is we're leaning on the AI to manage our software methodology. So you don't really need to know how anything works. You don't even need to know how to start. So I'm going to demonstrate that by just leaning on the AI to help us figure out how to start a new coding session. Okay, so, well, what should we do? How should we start? I have no idea what's going on. The idea here is that you should be able to just start a chat and you should not have to know how to do anything. What I just did there was I used the product called Super Whisper. So Super Whisper takes my audio transcription and runs it through a large language model. If you have done a lot of work through dictation, you know that a lot of times the front-end dictated text doesn't make any sense because it literally dictates every syllable that you say, and a lot of times you don't say things in an intelligible way. So Super Whisper can help make the final dictated text make a lot more sense. You can always just type, or you can always just use the built-in dictation system in the Mac or in Windows or whatever. But Super Whisper really is amazing. It's a really cool combination with Cursor. So now I'm going to take that prompt that I just ran through audio and through a language model in Super Whisper, and I'm going to run it through my coding model of choice, which of course right now is to Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I'm going to run it in agent mode in Cursor. Agent mode gives the AI coding assistant the most agency. It gives it the ability to open files, it gives it the ability to run commands, it gives it the ability to look around and basically follow instructions at a higher level. And so we have given it some instructions. So I'm going to just send it that. So it's going to see the rules file that I just showed you, which you really never need to look at ever again. The first thing that the rules file told me to do was look at the Ruby file. So that's what it's doing to get a sense of orientation and context. Every time you start a new coding session, it's going to do that because it was instructed to do that. Now, one of the things it was instructed to do is run a series of commands, so it loads the package.json to look at exactly how to run those commands. So once it figures out how to run those commands, well, it's figured out that it's a Node project, obviously, so it's just making sure that all the software is up to date so that we can get started with our coding session here. So one of the first things that I told it to run is one of the pieces of our curated technology stack, which is Storybook. Now, if I click that open button, notice I didn't actually run any command myself. It's just doing it for me. So it opened the terminal window over here. It's running Storybook inside of it. Storybook is accessible here. I don't have to click on that. I don't have to find it myself. It just starts it for me. So now I'm looking at Storybook. So this is very similar to what you have when you have Claude artifacts, or V0, where you have a chat interface over here, and then you have the actual artifacts over here. So the Vibe Coding Workbench contains some example components. There's a Hello World component. There it is a payment dashboard component, and you can see that is in Storybook. Storybook is like a catalog that shows you the different variations of all your components in isolation. So you can write different stories that represent the different scenarios. So for example, in the Hello World component, we have a certain functionality here. But what if that name was really long? So if we were going to test this in an application, then we would actually have to create like a record in our data or something that has a really long name just to see that it works. In Storybook, we can just create a story that represents that scenario just so that we can see it and make sure that it works. So a common example of a use case for that would be if you have a component that needs to display like an error message in an error scenario. It's a pain in the neck to simulate an error condition in your application by creating a problem, especially problems that are not that common. So if you want to do your development work to make sure that your error message looks good and behaves properly and all that, then you can create a scenario called a story in Storybook that represents that scenario. So Storybook is a really nice way to to design your components in isolation and to send whatever fixed mock data into them that you need to in order to test the different functionality, like really long strings or error messages or whatever. So the second thing that the AI has been told to set up for us every time we do a new current session is the factual application. So this actual application is a React application. It's built in a very, very simple way using Webpack. It doesn't depend on any sort of backend, so there are no opinions about whether it uses AWS Amplify or a traditional REST backend or anything like that. There is it doesn't use Next.js, so it doesn't have any sort of opinions about routing or anything like that. It's very, very vanilla. It's designed to be sort of like, this app is designed to be like a type out of negative donor for any component that you make inside of it. You can just rip it out and send it into anything else, sort of like a V0 component or a Shadkin component. So this is a workbench for playing with all the different components. These are the different examples that it comes with. It also comes with some documentation here. Now the documentation is just designed to help you get started with some examples. There are examples of what kinds of things you can do, but there are also menus of what the options are. So if you tell it to create a new component, if you're not a user experience designer, then, or a full stack developer or something from encoder, then you might not know what components are available. So if you click on this, then you get basically like a restaurant menu, like a server at a restaurant has handed you a menu of your different options of different components that you can use. There are buttons, there are cards, there are calendars, there are date pickers, there's a date picker. There are, press this button, might get a dialog box. There's what's a drawer? Bowl. Oh, that's cool, isn't it? Isn't it neat? All right, okay. I want to play with that. Anyway, so this gives you like an idea of what's available, and it gives you a common language that you can speak with your artificial intelligence. So when you speak with Claude, if you talk about Sonar, it'll understand what you're talking about. You can tell it that you want a Sonar notification from, the top right, from the bottom left, whatever. Another example is the colors. Whenever you talk about colors, like, hey, I want to change this button to, fuchsia. Well, how am I going to tell it exactly what shade of pink I want? I don't know what the vocabulary is, right? So if I click on this tells me what the vocabulary is. Freezing tailwind, and it talks about colors in this way. So, there's peep pop tone. You know what I actually want is fuchsia, and then this shows you how the colors are scaled. So, I actually want fuchsia 500. So that gives me a specific term that I can use to talk with the AI agent to describe exactly what color I'm looking for. In the same way, if I want an icon, like imagine I'm imagining like a radio tower type icon. Well, instead of trying to describe what it looks like to the AI agent, I can just try to find, oh look, that's kind of what I'm imagining. So radio tower. So if I use this term, radio tower, when I'm talking about adding an icon, if I say add a radio tower icon, then the AI knows what I'm talking about. So, third thing that it needs to run here is, this is a utility that helps you look at your tests. So one of the things that this project does is it builds test coverage into every component from the start. That's one of the agile software development principles that this project encapsulates. And so, like, for example, when we told it to build the Hello World component, it covered it with some just basic test, just to make sure that these things stay stable over time. If someone ever breaks one of these things when they add something new, those tests will fail. So we can run those tests, all three of those tests passed in that one suite. We can also run just all the tests all at once. And this helps us confirm, this helps us validate. So the entire concept of agile software development is based on taking small, verifiable baby steps in order to mitigate the risk of making changes. And that's exactly what these unit tests help you to accomplish. In addition to that, in Storybook, there are interaction tests where you can check to make sure that certain things happen as expected when things change. And so this project uses both of those. So every time you create a new component, that knows that it should cover everything that tests and both kinds of tests, and also that it should use tech checking to make sure that everything is internally valid and consistent. So just an example of how to actually use it to work with something. Let's see. Let's change the background color and the button, even the Hello World component. Let's change it to Fuchsia 500. So this runs what I just said through transcription and a large language model. Then we run through a 3.7 sonnet, Claude 3.7 sonnet in agent mode, and it just figures out what it did. So I don't need to look at any code files. I don't need to find any code files. I don't need to open, edit, or save any code files. I don't even need to reload the application once it makes the changes to see if it worked. It makes the changes, it figures out what it needs to do, comes up with a plan, starts to update. And so just like when you're using something like the Zero or Claude artifacts, you automatically see the results over here when it makes change. A whole lot of things will automatically update. The sorted book will automatically update. The tests will automatically run if you're running watching. But also, the AI assistant here has been very specifically instructed to always run tests anytime it makes any change. So even if you don't look at Majestic, even if you just don't have any interest in running Majestic, that's really just a utility for you, a convenience for you. But you don't have to use it because the AI is still going to follow the test-driven development process, even if you don't pay any attention to Majestic. So things like that are built in at the core. And I know one of the things that's built in at the core is support for light and dark mode, just because this is all built on Shadkin. We just want to remind you, here's a list of technologies involved in the curated technology stack. And this is just really an example of a way to create the starting kit that you can give to a business user so that they can create things that the developers can run with. So if your technology stack is different than this, like say, for example, your technology stack involves Next.js in addition to React, and maybe your backend and continuous delivery DevOps strategy is based on AWS Amplify, which we do highly recommend, then you might add those technologies to this curated technology stack. What you might fork this project, modify the technology stack, and then you've got an assistant that is specifically set up to work with your technology. Now, if you ever run into the problems where you've just hit the end of the road or you hit a block and you need some help, we can help you with that. We have decades of experience at operating mission-critical serverless software applications in production at enterprise-level sophistication. So we're familiar with all of the issues of regulatory compliance and monitoring and all of that. And in addition to that, we're obviously very interested in exploring the new ways of doing things as we move into the AI-enhanced era. So, if you need any help at any time, you can count on us. All right, that's it for the ad. Now, I would like to also demonstrate creating a more extensive edition. So, let's try creating that drawer. Was pretty neat, right? Let's add a new component for visualizing, let's imagine visualizing what's happening in the engine room. I want to know the status of the warp engine. I want to know the ancient speed and the fuel rod levels and all that kind of stuff. It could like science fiction and future-y. It needs to support light mode, dark mode, obviously. It should be one of those cool drawers that comes up from the bottom. Like when I press that button, the drawer should pop up from the button with all of that stuff in it, and it should act in like gauges or charts or something to represent all that stuff. It should have a flat design with rounded corners, no border, and it's mission critical. This is super, super, super important. It must include the color Fuchsia 500. You could also include blue 500, I guess, if you want. So now I'm going to just take that word salad of vibe thoughts of points in latent space about things that I might want, and I just send that to large language model and then Claude 3.7 Sonnet in agent node, and AI figures out how to accomplish that. So I just sort of expressed my wishes, make it so. Vibe coding is all about allowing the machine to figure that out without me ever looking at any code, without me ever even typing. I hadn't typed this whole time, right? So, Cursor has a thing called YOLO mode for agents, where it will run commands without even asking you. You can just give it permission to run commands. If you notice here, I'm approving the commands myself because in the current version of Cursor, 46.8 is the version I'm using. That YOLO mode is a little bit broken, and it won't run those commands automatically like it did in 45, but we'll be past that soon. So just remember YOLO mode. Just basically approve it to do everything. That's what I do. If it messes up anything, you've got Git. It's not going to delete your whole folder outside of the project or anything, so don't worry about it. So what it's doing here is it's creating a new component, and if you sit and watch it as it's working, it's sort of like watching water boil, because if you create a new feature and that new feature involves 2 or 3 different files, then at some point only one of those files is going to exist, and so everything is going to be in an inconsistent state. And so that's what's happening right now. It's creating, it looks like some kind of an engine status component that involves some kind of a URL chart component, which of course the whole thing is broken because the URL chart component didn't exist yet. So it looks like things at least exist. Things might not be working yet, so I'm not going to click on it right away because this is a demo and I don't want any embarrassing mistakes like that because I don't expect it to work. But anyway, what it's doing is it's figuring out how to make it happen, or I just told it to do, and is you're writing all the components, and of course it understands that according to our development methodology, as soon as it adds something new, it should immediately stop and validate everything that it can. So that means that it's going to run all the type checking, it's going to run the storybook interaction tests, it's going to run the just unit tests, and it also understands that as it builds this new component, it needs to cover the component with those new tests. So it's a key part of what it's adding here. Well, let's run the test to make sure that everything is working correctly, just like I described. So it knows that it made a bunch of changes and it needs to run the test. So let's actually look at the component, see if it does what we wanted. So there's the button that I asked it for. There's the drawer. That's pretty cool. And I see my fuchsia, so that was a minimum requirement. I like the messages. That's kind of cool. Oh, I like how it's animated and changing. That's a nice effect. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this orange, but you know, we could always fix that. So it also has determined that all the tests are passing, and it is doing a git commit for us. So this is one of the reasons why you might want to approve your commands before you run them, because it was just going to go off and do the git commit because we specifically told it to do that. The Cursor rules here, and I have told it that every time we make a small change and we verify that everything is successful, that we should commit. Because one of the things that we're helping you to avoid as a maybe a less experienced developer is we know that it's possible for you to just make too many changes where everything works and then everything works and then everything works and then all of a sudden everything doesn't work. And if you haven't been committing your work and changes that whole time, then you could lose it. So that's exactly what it's trying to protect you from here by frequently committing, and it's trying to do that for you because if you were an experienced software developer, then you would be expected to do that yourself. But since maybe you're not, it's doing that for you. So it manages all the things like running the 3 different things, running all the tests, committing all this stuff for you. We have some examples here in the example commands that you can use to operate Git without knowing anything about Git. So you can just talk about sharing things with developers and things like that. You don't have to talk about commits, merges, pushes, pulls, synchronization, rebasing, any of that complicated stuff. You know, me to worry about that stuff. It will help you with other Git things. So that is the overall point of the Vibe Coding Workbench from Anthus AI Solutions. And we hope you've enjoyed this Coder Dojo. So until next time, and please let us know if you run into any problems. We're always very happy to help.